Hello everyone, this is Serious Trivia, and welcome back to another episode of our speculation series covering the next Three Kingdoms title from Creative Assembly. In this episode, we'll look at what CA have actually publicly stated about the game, as we will have plenty of time in the future to speculate about the unknown. So roughly this time last year, the infamous Future of Total War 3 Kingdom video came out announcing the end of all support for the current title and the start of pre-production on the new title, which will be a new game based on the Romance of the Three Kingdoms novel, and it will also not be connected to the first title. This is actually all we know about the upcoming game, and since we spent our last episode discussing why support was cut, we're going to simply skip that discussion here and focus on what they might mean by a game based on Romance of the Three Kingdoms novel. For those who don't know, well, the Three Kingdoms period is a historical period in Chinese history, spanning roughly from the later periods of the Eastern Han Dynasty all the way to the formation of the Jin Dynasty. Its popularity in modern culture stems largely from the Romance of Three Kingdoms novel, which was a 14th century historical novel attributed to the author Luo Guanzhong. And while the novel is based heavily on the records of Three Kingdoms, it is still a work of fiction, as it also relied on many romanticized folklores regarding the period. The closest modern parallel I can provide is probably Ken Follett's Kingsbridge series, or his many other popular historical novels that are largely based on true historical events, but literary flairs were nevertheless added to make them into bestsellers. But unlike his books, where the topics often center around well-documented periods of modern history like World War I or the Cold War, Luo Guanzhong was writing about something that had happened over 1,000 years ago without the aid of the internet. Yet despite all this, the Romance of the Three Kingdoms still stayed relatively true to the history for the most part. The main deviations in the novel stem from the choice to feature Liu Bei and his faction of Shu as the main protagonist, as the novel would often skew historical events in their favor to highlight them as often larger-than-life heroes. And because of this, the novel became a really great story, especially during a time when China was under Mongolian occupation, as Luo Guanzhong lived during the Yuan dynasty, as many at the time felt similar desires to continue the Han rule and drew parallel to Liu Bei's struggle in the novel. It also helped that the novel was well written, with a good mix of prose and poetry that will eventually propel it to be regarded as one of the four classics of Chinese literature, alongside other great works such as The Journey to the West, Water Margin, and Dream of the Red Chamber. This status has earned it billions of readers, not only in China, but worldwide, and it's the main reason why the Three Kingdoms period is such a hot IP in modern day media, whether it's video games, TV series, movies, or even anime adaptations. Thus, when Total War 3 Kingdoms was being made as Creative Assembly's next major historical title, Romance mode was added in addition to the traditional Records mode as a nod to the significance of the novel. While most Total War fans might attribute this decision solely to the success of the Warhammer franchise, where heroes play a larger role, I would actually argue that Romance mode was essential for the core Three Kingdoms fanbase, as most fans only know the story from the Romance of the Three Kingdoms novel and wholeheartedly believe those stories as historically accurate. Indeed, fictional elements such as the Oath of the Peach Garden, the duel against Lu Bu at Hulao Gate, and Guan Yu's journey through the Five Gates to return to Liu Bei are so ingrained in people's mind that removing them would alter the story of the Three Kingdoms entirely. Even many of the famous weapons from the novel are entirely fictional, such as Guan Yu's iconic crescent blade or Lu Bu's sky piercer. While these differences are less noticeable for large portions of the Western fanbase, for fans of the Three Kingdoms period, taking out any of these story elements is akin to removing the sword in the stone from King Arthur or stripping Merlin's magic for the sake of historical accuracy. But the decision to go with two modes that were not supported equally did create a divide in the community for older fans of Total War titles, who often like to believe that historical Total War games are realistic battle simulators. This, of course, is a fallacy, as none of the older titles were realistic battle simulators either, but I do agree that the presence of single entity, larger than life generals is a problem for Total War games branded as a historical title. So, to avoid this issue, the next Three Kingdom game will not be a historical title. And before the historical fans go up in arms, I am certain there is going to be a major historical title announced later this year, or at the latest early next year. And personally, I can't wait to see what it will be as well. So hopefully we will all hear about it sooner rather than later. As for the next Three Kingdoms title, I hope Creative Assembly can think outside of the box and break the limitations of what we typically associate with Total War titles of the past. At its core, a Total War game needs two simple elements: a grand campaign management element and a real-time strategy battle element. In the past, the real-time strategy element has often taken center stage, but with the introduction of the Warhammer franchise, historical-based games no longer can compete on that front. The constant complaint about lack of unit diversity, or the demand for the inclusion of ahistorical caricature factions like the Stone Age Nunman factions that we got in the Furious Wild, proves that point. And this is without even going into the laughable demands for the inclusions of Korea, Japan, and even the Mongols, who will actually not even exist as an ethnicity for another 700 years or so. And I'm not laughing at the people's desire for a game focused on a conflict of wider scale, but it almost feels like when someone who is unfamiliar with, say, the American Civil War buys and plays a video game set in the period, and then proceed to complain that Union and Confederate armies lack unit diversity. And in order to spice the game up, we're going to need red-face, axe-swing Native American factions added in an Eastern map expansion, and then some moose-riding, mild-mannered Canadian faction added in a Northern map expansion, before adding the Pirates of the Caribbean-style naval factions in the South, and so on. Certainly, this sounds like a fun combination for a 10-year-old, but at a certain point, you're better off just playing Ultimate Epic Battle Simulator rather than a Total War game. So since that's not the direction I personally would want a Three Kingdoms game to go, I believe Creative Assembly need to shift more of its focus on improving the grand strategy aspect of the next Three Kingdoms game. Granted, Total War Three Kingdom is already the pinnacle of diplomacy for any Total War title, which really goes to show you how lacking Total War as a franchise has been in this department in the past. Settlement management saw slight improvements in complexity with the introduction of Wuxing synergies among 3 separate income sources, but province-level management is completely missing, and larger factions still don't feel engaging to play or manage, which is a problem that must be solved if we ever wish to see a later date start, such as 220, where the map is going to be predominantly filled by 3 major factions in Wei, Shu, and Wu. And the current stopgap method of assigning generals as vassal factions or using subjects for empires is not really going to work, as proven by my recent Let's Play using a 207 start mod that tried to apply this approach to the game, as AI vassal logic for both the vassal and the liege are simply not intelligent enough to reflect a true vassal relationship. I think adding a provincial level management structure can give your generals more things to do, as they can be assigned as governors and inspectors, and perhaps there can be some function to make these regions slightly more autonomous without making them directly into a vassal. And owning an entire province can add more specialized bonuses to incentivize a more targeted expansion strategy in game. And provincial units that were quite famous during this time, such as the heavy spearmen of Danyang in the Yang province, The riders of Liang and Bin province, the archers of the Yi province, the yellow turban forces of the Qing province are all specialized land-based unit that can be added to a province level bonus rather than having them added to a certain faction. So we can have a combination of, say, faction unique unit as well as province unique unit that is based on your conquest per game. And this can add an additional layer of diversity across campaigns, as it can diversify your experience from each one depending on the direction you expand, giving you different powerful units to use at different points in each of your playthroughs. I also believe that the new game can take a page out of Dynasty Warriors by focusing heavily on the three core factions of Shu, Wei, and Wu, instead of the typical Total War approach of 10 plus factions at launch. Certainly, other minor factions should still be playable, but the three core factions that make up the namesake title should get special treatment in terms of providing a narrative experience for the player. Now recall Liu Bei's faction start in the 182 Mandate of Heaven campaign. Players were presented with three narrative choices to build out Liu Bei's starting traits. This is not only a great tool to allow for more gameplay customization for the player, but also a nod to the novel, as all three of these events came straight from the novel. Similar events can be made for the major characters in Wei and Wu as well, since the novel and the period predominantly focused on characters from these three factions. And these three factions also stretches across the entire timeline of the Three Kingdoms period, whereas minor factions typically only rose to power for a short period of time before being put down by one of these three kingdoms, so they fit better as DLC content used to enrich the base game experience for playing one of the core three kingdoms. Of course, I know there are going to be those of you who might not enjoy a more narrative experience, just like how the Vortex campaign and the Realm of Chaos campaign in Warhammer 2 and 3 are not the most popular with fans, as the pure sandbox experience of mortal/immortal empires drives most of the traffic in those games. Therefore, I believe an alternative sandbox mode that involves a map editor with all the available start dates will be as valuable to the game as Immortal Empire mode is to Warhammer. While I know many would like a character editor too, to allow for creation of your own custom character and thus faction, I think it's just a bit hard for me to see how the developer could modularize the different faction mechanics for you to essentially not only allow you to create a character, but a custom faction with its own custom mechanic. It just seems too much of a technical hurdle to really implement well, so I don't really foresee custom character being allowed, but custom starting locations and custom dates for different locations seems very doable. Now we can continue all day fantasizing about all the different features we would want in the new game, and we definitely will in this series, but in more bite-sized and focused features in the future, as ideas such as provincial management should be made into a dedicated episode by itself. The goals of this episode is to just dissect the limited amount of information that CA has actually provided us about the game, as I wanted to share my take on what a game based on the Romance of the Three Kingdoms should look like, and how the chance to create a non-historical Three Kingdoms game based entirely on the novel can try to break away from the traditional Total War formula and provide a deeper grand campaign experience supplemented by narrative elements from the novel, while preserving the sandbox Total War experience with a much desired true sandbox mode akin to Immortal Empires that would allow even more freedom to the player than ever before, with the inclusion of a map editor to allow non-canon starts and interesting player-made scenarios. Once again, everything in these speculation series are a reflection of my personal opinions in regards to the new title. They're meant to spur constructive discussion among the community. So whether or not you agree with me, feel free to share your opinions in the comment section below. And through this exchange of ideas, I'm sure all our opinions will shift, evolve, or change entirely over time, and ultimately better ideas for the game will come from it. And since I know there are a few CA developers who also are fans of the channel, hopefully we can also influence the final product for the better as well. So thank you all for watching, and I'll see you all next time. Bye!